We're back on Freshwaves. We're talking with Carol Davidson, and we're moving into a discussion now that we'll try and bring what we've been talking about in a very broad sense, because we've talked about everything from worldwide disasters to things that are closer to home. We're going to talk about the provincial election, but not from the point of view of who's doing what in terms of the parties, but how the media is covering the provincial election. And this brings into account, first of all, the influence of social media on news these days. It brings into account what's real and what's not real. It's taking things out of context, and it's even to the point where, under the guise of preventing fake news, one of the candidates has hired their own personal reporter to follow them around and report what's going on.
Okay, I have to stop you there. That's not a reporter. That's a PR person. That's a public relations person.
Or a spokesperson. Isn't that what a
that's not a reporter.
Job used to be?
I can tell you the rules in newsrooms are that, say, you had one of the candidates, the local candidates here, you have to have the others too. You have to give equal time to everybody. So that person following around is basically his public relations person. Reporter is wrong.
Journalist is even wrong.
Well, journalist. I actually, when I saw that, I posted to my friends on Facebook who are mostly all journalists. We have to think up a new word for reporter, because that's not what she is. She is spreading the word for one person, not providing well-rounded, both sides of or multiple sides of every issue. The thing is, though, if you don't know better and you go online and you see she has a mic flash.
Exactly.
She has a camera. She looks exactly like, a real journalist. So it's dangerous. And that kind of behavior by the candidates that do stuff like that, I feel it really wears away at the public trust. And that's wrong. If you want to be my public representative, have respect for how people get their information, and don't resort to things that may not be above board necessarily, or may not be easily understood. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just sort of...
but give it the real title that it deserves.
Right. Yeah, I have my own videographer, or I have my own crew, not a journalist, because that's not what journalists are told or meant to do in real journalists. They really do have to cover all people. If you bring in a candidate, you give them 5 minutes, you have to give 5 minutes to everybody else as well. So, at least that's how the major newsrooms work. So I just find that really, theater.
Yeah.
It's not journalism.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but when I think of a real journalist, I'm actually almost in a way thinking of a sleuth. Someone who hears what you're saying.
And digs
for the background as to where that came from, why you're saying that. And like you were alluding to earlier, when you have a little bit of background, so you're actually researching and knowing where it's coming from, but then maybe knowing what happened even before that to influence this to be a thing that we need to talk about now, So you're getting all of that in depth around whatever has been said by a person. So it's never just Joe Smith said, I hate dogs. You get more to the story.
Well, you get analysis. And that's the problem with just sort of putting out, he says this. Well, where's the analysis? Where's the critical thinking to say, well, does that add up? And what do you mean? And that's what journalists are supposed to do. They're supposed to provide the news, but also some kind of perspective, not through their own mouths, by going to get the psychologist or the finance guy or the bean counter or whoever to say, does this add up? Does this financial plan, does that actually work? And it's never the journalist's job to opine on that. It is their job to find the other people that are the experts on that and tell you what they think. But there's none of that when you have somebody who's just sort of creating the impression that this is a report, and it's just really promoting one particular view. But again, I think you could pick up the 3 major papers in Toronto and tell that they all have candidates too. It's not like major, that used to be taboo. But I think we've inherited that a little bit from the U.S., that in the U.S., they'll actually a newspaper will come out and actually, endorse a candidate. And we haven't quite gotten to that point that I know of, but certainly you can tell by the front pages who's bad-mouthing whose policy and who's saying what about whom.
Right. And people know kind of without it being said which
one
has
which view.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like newspapers always present a crystal clear, pure view of political life in this country. But again, back to, and believe me, my kids have had a fantastic education in York Region. I have no complaints. But again, I wish that just like reading a newspaper properly or being discerning about your news, that kids were learning to be politically active and kids were learning, you know, as your son said, well, this guy tells lies. Where did he get that from? Or this person is dishonest. Where did he sure didn't get that from years of reading newspapers and collecting information, with all due respect. And I do wish that there was political engagement at a very early age, that the education system said to kids, okay, here's this fantastic, beautiful thing you have. It's called a vote. And if you really want to live in a democracy, you need to exercise it every single time, and you need to know what you're doing. Don't just throw, just don't throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. Be engaged, and here's why you need to be engaged. And it's exciting to know that, you wish there wasn't as much traffic on the house beside your, on the street beside your house. Guess what? You can make a difference in your community, or bigger and bigger. I wish we were teaching kids that in school, but we aren't. We aren't teaching kids to be political animals or to take an interest in their government.
Well, I like the fact that in high school they have the course called civics, which most kids consider to be a gimme. It's a half a term long. Please, a half a term long? Is there not something about politics, being a part of a community and being raised in a country that's a democracy, that can last for more than half a term? Is there not enough learning capability there that we could go into exactly the discussion that we're having and make that little half-term course turn into a full-term course that's mandatory for all kids? So they not only get out of there with an understanding of the 3 tiers of government and how that all works, but with an understanding of how they work within that system of government, that, like you said, the democratic vote is actually a treasure. It's like a little thing to be held in your palm.
It's a gift.
Yes.
It's a gift. A gift that many people around the world would love to have.
Yeah.
And I hope this is always the case, but when I cast a ballot for anything, I still believe it is 100% an honest count, that the ballot boxes haven't been stuffed, that the tabulation hasn't been fixed. I believe it is honest and true what we decide. But shouldn't we all know more about what we're deciding instead of just sort of running with it? But unfortunately, it's not just kids that don't take the time. Historically, we have very low vote counts for elections, unless people are really mad about one thing, generally. And I worked on many elections for CTV News, and on their election show, I'd be on site where somebody at a headquarters or whatever. There's always a core of people that really are into a candidate and really know all the issues, are really excited. But I think the last municipal election, at least in Richmond Hill, in my riding, maybe 30% of people showed up, voted. And that's your property taxes. That's money right out of your pocket, right? Which may or may help you decide whether you can stay in your home. So, I mean, none of us as a group, I think a lot of us could get more invested in at least finding out why we should vote and then doing it.
Yes, going out and actually doing it. I remember walking into the accounting office department of the company I was working for at the time, and I said, "Are you guys going to vote tonight?" Nobody said a thing. Dead silence. There's 25 people in that office, and it was dead silent. And I said, "Well, do you know legally you're allowed to have a certain number of hours, so you can all leave now?" And they said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, it's 4 o'clock and you need 3 consecutive hours or whatever before the polls close, so you can go now." "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Yeah, you can go. Pack it up and go, people. You're allowed to go. This is election day." They were stunned. And half of them left only because they could get an hour off.
I know. It truly is a privilege, and we need to treat it that way. I know a friend of mine in Australia was saying they actually fine people in Australia who don't show up. And I don't know if you want to go that far, but really, it is so important that everybody's voice is heard. And I hope there's 2 elections in this province this year, the provincial one and then the municipal one in October. And I hope people get excited or angry or whatever it is that makes them. And usually polling stations aren't that far. You know, it's usually not that hard to get there. So I hope we have record turnout at every election, because that's the only way we're going to preserve the democracy, and the only way that politicians will say, hey, people are watching.
Yeah.
We need to do better.
We do need to do better. We do need to do better on an individual basis and on a group basis. If you know somebody who is going to be sitting at home eating popcorn and watching a mindless television show, maybe you can encourage them to come with you or offer them a ride or something like that so they can get to the police station.
Well, if you know elderly that live on their own and aren't, don't live somewhere that has a van or whatever, offer to take them with you, and offer, not only will that, and I know having had elderly parents myself, that outing will not only make their day, they will feel valued.
Yes.
For having a say.
Yep.
So it's all good for the community to excite people about voting and getting out there. Now, I mean, it's not that hard to really find out even a couple of lines about the candidates in your area. Take the time, Google a name you see on somebody's lawn, see if you like what they say, and then go for it.
Yes, go for it. And we're going to take a little break now. We got to pay a few bills. When we come back, we're going to talk about how you go for it, how you find that information. You're listening to Fresh Waves. We're with Carol Davidson this morning, and we'll be right back.
Brittle bone disease, a birth defect, caused Lee's fragile bones to break even at the slightest touch. Then her family heard about Shriners Hospitals for Children, which provide pediatric specialty care for orthopedic conditions, burns, spinal cord injuries, and more. The world-class medical care that Lee receives at Shriners will enable her to live a fuller and more active life. Call 1-800-361-7256 for more information. Shriners Hospitals, helping kids defy the odds.
We are back on Fresh Waves. We're talking with Carol Davidson, and we're talking about journalism and reporting and all that kind of stuff. And now we're talking about journalism, reporting, and the provincial elections that are happening right now. And I guess it pertains to any election situation. You hear things on the news, and we've talked about the newspapers sort of have, you hear such and such a newspaper is very right-wing, such and such is very left-wing. And the same is with the big TV networks. And the same is a lot of times with the news outlets, unless they're doing the 24-hour news, which is just little bites of news. So-and-so is in Muskoka today, and so-and-so is in Hamilton, and that's about as in-depth as it gets. So if you're trying to get an overall picture of the candidates, one of my favorite things to do is to go to an all-candidates meeting of the people in your riding.
Yeah. And I know in my area, Ward 1 in Richmond Hill, there's one, and I would encourage people to go to those because they're pretty much open. You can ask questions. Your local paper might often support that or host it, but I don't see why. There must be groups here that would sponsor it as well. But it is your chance to really line everybody up, ask them the same question, and at minimum, find out who answered the way you like. Mm-hmm. You might be won over by somebody you knew nothing about. It is difficult for people who are trying to beat an incumbent, because incumbents usually have name recognition and a lot of stuff that may or may not actually be indicative of how they behave in government. It may not be indicative of what they think or how they're going to represent you. But that's the other thing. Like anybody who thinks, boy, I would love to run. Why not? Why don't you get involved and run? But anyway, I digress. Those all candidate meetings, they're not always well attended. They are sometimes well attended by people who have a certain issue, but I love those things. They're really fun. Well, we just saw a televised one of the provincial leaders, and I'm sure people watching they may have completely changed their perspective on people based on what they saw.
Yeah, and it's kind of seeing the person behind the party. And I know, let's clear something up. People have this, well, it's not even a confusion. We know what happens. You've got the people in your riding, and they might be the best person you've ever seen in your life, but you also have to be knowledgeable about the party, because then you might like one party's representative in your riding, but you like a different representative in the
for the leadership.
Yeah, for the leadership. And it's an odd thing. I wish that we could vote separately.
Right.
For just the person in my riding and then just the leader of the party
right.
overall.
Yeah.
And it's...
Yeah. I guess you have to decide what's important to you. I mean, I think that we all know sort of what the parties in this country do and what, this one spends more, or this one's really fiscally tight, or this one is open, this one is closed, whatever. I would say, for me, look locally and say, well, what are my issues and who best will address that? Because the chances are whatever it is closer to home will probably affect you day to day more than, if taxes are going to go up on something, I'm not sure what you're going to do about it no matter who's there, or if, they've decided to buy something or have a program. But locally, I would think, for me, the way I look at it is, okay, well, what will directly affect the way I live, my family lives, and who do I think best represents what I'm looking for? For example, green belts. Stouffville's a beautiful place. Do you care about the green belts in your neighborhood? Okay, well then who's going to best represent that? Who, maybe they won't necessarily have policy, but why not go for the person who might speak to that? Or maybe, you feel there's a need for more affordable housing here. Who could speak to that? Because you have kids, you want to get them out of your basement and there's nowhere to put them. Maybe you don't want them to go too far from home. Who best represents what you need? That's sort of how I look at it now.
That seems like a very practical way of looking at it. And then how would you sort out the good news, the bad news, the ugly news?
Yeah, I had to say one thing that I learned when I was in news is all major news outlets pay for polling. And they pay a lot of money, and they don't get crackpots. They get, organizations that have an infrastructure, organizations that have a track record, organizations that know how to poll. And I can't remember the exact number, but like under 2,000 people, they've done the, there's an algorithm that tells you this, if you talk to 1,500 people, and I don't know the exact number, you really will get a true representation of Canada or of a large group of Ontario. You don't need to talk to every single one of them. You need quite a small percentage to really get a good idea, as long as that sample is varied. You're not just calling everybody who lives in Yorkville. You're calling people from all around. So you get a varied sample. I can't tell you how many times I've been working on election coverage and the whole newsroom is shocked that everything they've been saying through polling is wrong. So, don't be swayed by polls if you can help it. If you see that, say you have a candidate and it looks like they're trailing and they don't have a hope of winning, if that's the person you really like, vote for them anyway, because guess what? Those polls aren't always right. And they're based on what people thought 2 weeks ago. Right. A lot can happen between now and next June 7th. So go for the person that you want and don't let polling sway you. I kind of disagree with polling because I feel like it defeats people from going for who they really want because they think, oh, well, that's a waste. This person's never going to win.
Preconceived idea of who's
that it's preordained.
Right.
Exactly.
And then they don't bother even getting off the couch to go and
why
vote.
Bother? Right. So in a way, polling is a disservice, I would say. The stuff that might be more interesting to people is, what are people mostly interested in this election? What are people talking about? Or when we ask people, what's your number one thing? Is it economy? Is it affordable housing? Is it taxes?
Is it hydro?
Is it hydro? Is it, is it old age? Is it hospitals?
Right.
That stuff's really interesting because it actually helps you say, okay, well, this is what most people are interested in. This is what I'm interested in. Who talks to this? Which candidate talks to these things? But in terms of who's going to win, I honestly have seen it be wrong. I've seen those numbers be wrong more than right over 27 years of being in a newsroom.
Isn't that interesting?
But it's also... it's an event for a news organization. They pay a lot of money for a poll, and they tend to go big on it, and they'll do many, many, many stories on it because they've spent a lot of money on it, and they want to dissect it right down so that they can get a big bang for their buck. But just because the news organization's making a big deal about it doesn't mean you should. Read it if you want to, don't read it, but move on and go with the people that you really want to represent you for whatever your reasons are.
Mm-hmm. Now, I see that social media is playing a big role right now in people's general opinion. And what I've noticed by kind of taking you up on some of the things that we've talked about in the past is when I start digging a bit or paying attention, I'm seeing the same 5 or 6 people voicing their opinion, good or bad, on specific people about specific events. I can almost take their Facebook posting and plaster it to every single issue along the way. It's going to be the same. It has the same vent. It has the same thing. And it's just somebody who seems to have a whole lot of time to be on a social media outlet.
Yeah.
But in the same sense, if you just come onto that site that looks by the title to be representing a community,
I agree with you.
Disconcerting.
Yeah, I'm part of a website that says no politics, but as I stick with it, I see, it's no politics if it's not about the one person that the webmaster or whatever they're called likes. Like they will promote this person, and yet other ideas are not welcome. So even people say, "Oh, no politics." Oh, you mean not anything that isn't your politics.
Right.
But I'll tell you, I've worked on a few campaigns just as a volunteer, and believe it or not, I don't care who the candidate is. If you really have a feeling that you want to know what this person's really about, look up their campaign office and say, I want to talk to the candidate. And I can almost guarantee you that they will take the time to call you back. Because even something as big as the provincial election, those people are working in a riding that is your community. They don't have to worry about the whole province. So if you call any candidate that you're interested in and the person is a volunteer that will answer the phone and you say, you know what, I'd really love to talk to Mr. X or Mrs. X or Miss X, they will call you back. I can almost guarantee that, because I think politicians realize no vote is worth ignoring and no person is worth dismissing. So why not go right to the top? Forget getting your analysis from social media or wherever. If you want to talk to a candidate, call. They'll talk to you.
Yeah, and it's an interesting perspective, because one of the things that I'm always toting on this show is that still, to this day, the most powerful tool in advertising is word of mouth. If they call that one person back, they know that person is probably, they've got the demographics from a family of 4. That family of 4 with the 2.5 kids, who knows what the 0.5 is, but anyway, the 2.5 kids is going to tell their groups, and then they're talking to 4 families with 2.5 kids. And
you mention it at hockey, and you mention it at soccer, and it grows.
At the baseball diamond, and before you know it, everybody's got the same opinion that you have, that this guy didn't call you back or this woman didn't call you back, and it's not a good thing. So they do call you back, or they do at least try to address you with someone else in their
That's
office.
Almost personal citizen journalism, right? Like if you talk to this person, whoever it is, and then you have social media yourself and say, you know what, I just talked to this person and they are not what I thought they were. I'm going to keep looking. Or you say, I just talked to this person and I couldn't believe their grasp of what we need in this community. Mm-hmm. That is you sort of floating out there some honest journalism from your perspective. And it'll probably be picked up by other people you know, and you can have engaging conversations. I'm all about people talking, because I never buy the Canadians are glib and surface and don't want those meaty conversations. It's just hard to find people to share those conversations with.
Exactly.
And if you start the conversation with a little bit of work on your end, a phone call, you'll be surprised what you find. It might be disappointing. Some of your friends might say stuff you're like, what? But it'll be engaging.
I have a network of friends now who know that I do this show, and they will call me and say, do you know someone who does this? Or what do you think of that? I know you had this person on your show. What did they think of this? Oh, I have a question about local politics. I'm going to call Brent. So it's funny how it works.
Right. And the only reason why anyone's listening to us right now is because they're thinking locally.
Yeah.
So why not think that way? Looking forward to next week's election, think about who do you want to represent you and make a call.
Can't hurt, can it?
No, it can't. And I can't imagine anyone will blow you off. I really can't.
I don't think they would either. Okay, we're going to take a little tiny break. Jay, a fast one.
Okay.
And when we come back, we've got an announcement from Carol.
Oh, boy.
So we're waiting to hear that. We'll be back right after this.
Hey, I'm whistling. Would you like to whistle too? Whistle FM is looking for a few good volunteers. Come and join our team and learn a new skill. We're looking for producers, show hosts, and even people to help out around the station. Learn something new and meet new people. Email us at admin@whistleradio.com or drop by the station behind Stillville Fine Furniture. We hope to see you soon.